Okay, a few more, and again, these can be male or female. There's no specific requirement. You might have a redeemer archetype or a savior character, and this character is willing to die for his or her beliefs. Might be on a mission to save humanity or to save a certain group of people. We see this clearly in the character of Simon from Lord of the Flies. And again, going back to biblical stories, we see this laid out with Jesus of Nazareth and the elements of his story and his quest. And if you're aware that many Western writers look to the Jesus of Nazareth story as sort of the first archetype of this savior character, you'll know that you would look for a character to have characteristics somewhat like Jesus did. So Simon in Lord of the Flies had the Mediterranean coloring, olive skin and dark curly hair. He helped the little kids to get food. He helped to build the shelters. That ties in with the idea of the carpenter with the Jesus story. So if you're aware that that can be a type of character that's going to be introduced into literature and you start to look for these things or they stand out to you, then that can give you a heads up that this character is going to have to make a sacrifice or something's going to happen. All right, we also have the scapegoat. Not exactly the same as a savior, because the scapegoat might get blamed for things, but that doesn't mean that the scapegoat wants to do this, isn't necessarily willing to be punished or to die for the things that are happening. Sometimes the scapegoat might assume responsibility and in that case becomes a type of a hero. Others times the scapegoat is not going to accept responsibility. And if you've read Animal Farm, you would know that the character of Snowball was a scapegoat for all of the problems and all the things that were happening on the farm. All right, then we have the idea of the double or the doppelganger. And this can be two separate people. You could have another person who is your double, or this can just be another side to your personality, a mirroring of a personality. And we see that in the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story, where it's the same physical person, but at different times, different elements of the personality takes over. We see it in the Batman comic series with Two-Face and the two different personalities of Harvey that take over and become that person. Edgar Allan Poe has a wonderful short story called William Wilson, which is about a doppelganger and seeing your doppelganger and sort of coming into an insight about yourself through seeing yourself this way, seeing an outside version of yourself. Okay, and then we get into those bad guy archetypes. Of course, we have the villain. And however strong the hero is, the villain is going to be equally as strong and is going to be just as evil as the hero is good. The villain is going to be actively trying to hurt the hero and working against the hero's goals. And we might find that the villain has superhuman powers. So we have Voldemort from the Harry Potter series, and we have Lex Luthor trying to stop Superman. Okay, another negative character, but more perhaps of a sideline character, would be the trickster. And this character uses misdirection, might use magic, does things to fool others in order to get what he or she wants. And a good example would be Joker from Batman. Okay, however, I want you to understand that the trickster is not always malicious. And in many mythologies, especially many Native American mythologies, we have trickster figures throughout who are simply trying to make the world more interesting. They don't always realize that what they're doing is going to cause harm to others. And if we look to Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream, we see that in the character of Puck, the fairy. He does like to trick people. He likes to see how they'll respond, but in his own way is a bit of an innocent and his goal is not to cause pain or hurt to others. All right, and then we might have the monster, the ogre. Often this character is a tool of the villain, or might be part of the plot device, in that the defeating the monster is just another challenge for the hero, and it's part of the hero developing his or her strength and learning about his or her own powers. Okay, and so you'll encounter those throughout. Now, the hero archetypes get another section all their own, because there are so many different types of heroes that we can encounter throughout literature. Now, probably one of the most common and well known is the warrior hero. And this is also sort of the idea of our epic hero. And when we think of Odysseus, when we think of the character of Harry Potter, these are our epic heroes. When we think of Buffy, from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Superman, okay, any of those kinds of characters as our warrior heroes, they seem to be almost godlike in that they have qualities that are above and beyond what the normal human. It might be a superior intellect, it might be superior physical strength, as in Superman, it might be superior power, like Harry Potter's magical powers, but something that sets them apart. They will often undergo many physical challenges, as well as some emotional and mental challenges, and they have external enemies, many external enemies. Then we have the lover hero, the hero who sets out on a quest motivated by pure love, whether that be love of a person, love of their society, or their community that they're maybe the leader of. Okay, but that's what drives this type of hero. And the image we have here is from The Princess Bride, which, if you have never seen this movie, I highly recommend that you go out and see it. But the character of Wesley is motivated by his love to survive being kidnapped by a pirate, and to survive several years of acting as a pirate, and then to go back and rescue his love before she can be married off to the villain. Okay, so more of our heroic archetypes. We have the tragic hero, and there are some very specific requirements to call someone a tragic hero. It is not, or a character is not a tragic hero just because his or her story maybe ends badly. That doesn't alone make for the tragic hero. So some of the requirements: a tragic hero has to begin life or begin the story as well respected, or someone of high standing in the community, whatever that community might be. And then that character has a fatal flaw: pride, anger, jealousy, some personality characteristic that leads to his or her downfall. After the downfall, the tragic hero must realize and take responsibility for what has happened. So he or she must admit that the flaw that caused all of this, was his or her responsibility. So there's no bad ending, and the hero never understands why. Okay, there has to be that epiphany moment. And so from Shakespeare again, we have Othello as a strong example of a tragic hero. Now, as I mentioned before, with the idea of the scapegoat, okay, you might have a scapegoat who is also a hero. And I think Simon from Lord of the Flies would fit that bill quite well. He is, I have to pause now to start over here. Okay, more of our heroic archetypes. Another very common hero that we'll see throughout literature is the tragic hero. But it's important to understand that there are very specific requirements in order to label someone a tragic hero. It cannot be enough that his or her story just doesn't work out well. Okay, that does not make the hero a tragic hero. So one of the first requirements is that the tragic hero must begin the story, or begins life, as someone who is well respected, or is of high standing within the community, or is a part of the nobility. So that criteria must be met. Then the next criteria is that the tragic hero has a fatal flaw that leads to her downfall. And this could be pride, this could be anger, this could be jealousy, any number of things, but there has to be some personality characteristic that causes the tragic hero to suffer or to endure the tragedy that does happen. And then finally, it's not enough that the flaw brings this hero down and that there is no recovery, but the tragic hero must realize and take responsibility for what he did and acknowledge his or her flaw in this regard. So there has to be that epiphany where the tragic hero says, oh, yes, this is my fault. I caused this in some way. And so going back to Othello, or to Shakespeare, we have Othello as a very strong example of the tragic hero. All right, next we have again the idea of the scapegoat. At times the scapegoat can become a hero if he or she willingly accepts the blame and is willing to take the blame even though he or she isn't responsible, because that is what is necessary in order to bring about the well-being of the rest of the community. And then we have a proto-feminist female, or a female hero who is breaking against society or working against society. And I have a picture here of Xena, although I think she probably fits into the more traditional warrior hero mode. If we want to think about the feminist hero, The Awakening by Kate Chopin is a better example of something that would have a proto-feminist hero. Other heroic archetypes, some of my favorites of the heroes. There is the romantic or the gothic hero, and when I say romantic, I don't mean romance like Valentine's Day. I mean the romantic tradition in literature, which had, again, very specific requirements and expectations. So the romantic hero has a dark or a brooding side, is strongly independent, is often seen rejecting society's norms, is very intelligent. The romantics valued intelligence and instinct in all things. And so I feel that Batman probably is one of our best modern day examples of the romantic hero. All right, and then we have the anti-hero. This hero doesn't meet society's definition of a hero or even of goodness. The anti-hero doesn't necessarily set out to do good things. The anti-hero doesn't just reject society, but really distrusts and might be motivated to try to change society. And frequently the anti-hero is also a social outcast, is not someone who society accepts either. Now the image I have here is of Dr. Horrible, and this is going to be another recommendation. If you're not familiar with or haven't seen Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, it's available on DVD, and I strongly recommend it as a great example of playing with archetypes and stereotypes and really kind of turning them on their head. But if you're not familiar with him, and that isn't going to help us in understanding the anti-hero, you might be familiar with Captain Jack Sparrow from the Pirates of the Caribbean series, and he would be a very good example of a modern day anti-hero. He certainly is not setting out to do good for anyone other than himself, and yet that seems to be what happens, that he does help others. In literature, if you have read Brave New World, the character of Bernard Marx is a good example of an anti-hero from literature.